What is the conveyancer's overall role in the development process?
The conveyancer basically is the final link in the chain. All the other developers, the professionals, have done their part of the work. The surveyor's done the plans, the lender's got himself involved and knows where he's going with regarding discharging of mortgages and lending again to the new entities if they're going to be new entities. And so now the plans have been lodged by the surveyor or given to us to lodge for registration. Those plans go through an approval process and get ready for deposit. So then we prepare the documentation which creates a division, creates the new titles. Now we have to deal with all the people who have an interest in the land. That includes lenders on the titles, lenders who are going to be on the new titles if we're going to change ownership during it. We need to get consents from those people and arrange for them to produce the titles. If the land's freehold, of course, then the developers themselves produce the titles. Once those titles are all brought together and our documentation is signed and consented to, we lodge those documents for registration at the Lands Titles Office, and eventually the titles are produced, and we arrange for the titles to go back to the lenders if they're involved, or freeholds back to the new people or the original developers.
So what is the Lands Titles Office?
The Lands Titles Office is actually the Lands Titles Registration Office. It's a government department which controls and regulates and holds for public record the ownership of land. It was actually brought about in the world in South Australia in 1858, when Robert Torrens actually used the scheme to perfect the system from what is known as the old system. The old system of land, you needed to evidence the ownership of your land by holding documentation, and the previous documentation over a period of 25 years. So if you owned a piece of land, you had documents that evidence that you owned it. When you sold it on to the next person, that transfer was collected with that documents, and you actually ended up with a pile of documents called the pie. The pie of documents is what you use for evidence. There was no guarantees to it. There could be fraud involved along the way, and you had no guarantee that the land you owned was actually yours. So Robert Richard Torrens took the system of ships registration, the Lloyd's registration of ships, where an office held the title and a register of the ownership of the ships, and a piece of paper called the title of the ship actually went with the ship. So that system was transferred to the ownership of land, and there is a central registration which has a copy of the land and the evidence of the land and the ownership, called a certificate of title, and the owner holds the duplicate certificate of title, and that is his government guaranteed piece of evidence that he owns that land. There are a lot less ways to involve fraud, and Section 69 of our Lands Titles Act actually protects anybody from any risk that there was fraud in the transaction before it, whereas the old system had no such protection.
And in the old system, if fraud was found, you could have potentially have lost the land.
Absolutely. If fraud was proved and somebody could prove their ownership, the courts of equity were sitting all the time, and of course the only people who make money in those places are lawyers, so that if you had to protect your interest, you needed to spend a lot of money to confirm that you owned it, and in the end you could be found to not own the land, yes.
And it could be taken away.
Absolutely, it can be taken away. It will be taken by the person who can prove a greater equity in the land than what you can.
And in conclusion?
Well, I think that anybody who's contemplating a development or doing a development should always consider themselves as to being a professional doing that work. They're working with people who are educationally qualified and registered to do their job. All surveyors are registered. The lending institutions obviously follow legislation. Conveyancers are registered and licensed. And so you should consider yourself as professionals. You should deal with them as professionals, expect to pay professional fees and be treated like that. But you should also have a group of professionals that you deal with that you become part of, and they all become part of the scheme, so that if you're talking to your surveyor knows who your conveyancer is and what he's going to do, and the surveyor knows what the conveyancer knows what the surveyor is doing, so he can expect and know what the plan system is going to be. He can talk to each other before the lodgement of the plan, so the documents can be prepared together. So my advice would be to develop a professional relationship with all the people. You don't have a good team, you don't have a good result. You have a team with one bad link in the chain and you could run into problems definitely.
Yeah. Well, after all of that, it's now time to build. As a lot of you would be aware, problems can arise during the construction process. Problems will arise during your development project. What's more important though is how the problems are dealt with. As a fitting conclusion to this program, we're going to be speaking with Peter Jankovic from SA Building Consultants. Peter has had more years of experience in the property construction industry than I've had years of life.
There's a lot of builders, architects and even engineers who come to me occasionally and will with a problem and ask me to go and have a look. So I get a pretty good insight on work that is, if you like, faulty. And a lot of the work that I see that's faulty is usually after construction. It's a pity that some of the trades and builders couldn't see that work afterwards and realise some of the smallest mistakes will cause the biggest problems. Wet areas are the biggest headache, or leaking is the biggest headache, particularly of wet areas, and I'm known as Mr. Wet Area Man. I spent many years helping to write the building rules for wet areas here in South Australia, and it is such a simple thing that can go wrong, a simple thing in wet areas that can go wrong, that causes a lot of destruction, particularly to walls and floors. The other problem I see a lot is leaking of balconies and windows. We nowadays have gone back to a lot of single wall construction. That single wall construction means that you've only got one skin, so stud wall, whether it be timber or steel, and clad on the outside. And the method of flashing windows, some of the builders or some of the contractors don't do it very well. Rely on silicons, and so we see a lot of damage from leaking from round windows.
Peter, the building industry is a good industry, but what are some of the horror stories that you've seen?
It was a collapse of a building in Aldinga that I went to. I got a phone call early in the morning when I come down at 5 o'clock in the morning. A building, two-storey building, under construction. It had the wall frames up, the floor up, and the upper wall frames up, the roof up, no cover. And during the night, at about 5 o'clock in the morning, there was a windstorm came through, and the whole up just twisted and fell down and collapsed. And so I was looking at a single-storey house, and that happened because the supervisor had chosen to put in the braces, and at the front of the building was a lot of braces, a lot of sheet braces, which acted as a sail, and down she went. And what should have happened was there should have been temporary braces there. Had it happened during the day, somebody would have died. Had somebody been on site illegally, maybe even sleeping there overnight, they would have died. There's some of the horror story thing, but nowadays, of course, everything we do has to be scaffolded just about. And we're getting to the stage now where single-storey buildings, hopefully not, are going to have to be scaffolded all the way around as well. And you'll see it now where people are working with scaffold and fall protection on single-storey roofs. So I also saw a timber frame house, two-storey, where the bricklayers were working there, and that came down on Hindmarsh Island. I investigated that for the insurers to find out what caused it. And that was actually faulty materials. There was a timber company, I won't mention any names, but a timber company that's not there anymore, that was bringing out timbers, allowing it for use in housing, and the timbers were almost like balsa wood. I was able to hold a stud in my outstretched arm, hand, and just hold it up. It was so light, and that building in a severe gust came down, and again, lucky it didn't come down during construction when people were working there, and even more lucky that the house wasn't finished and people were living in it.